Good evening, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or two, and then we'll start tonight's event. Nice to see so many familiar faces, so welcome.
I think we're ready to kick off now. We've got probably the majority of people dialed in. So on that basis, Philip, I'll kickstart. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's great to see so many of you with us and some definitely familiar names joining us this evening. We will kick off shortly and I'll turn to Philip to introduce our speakers, and just the usual sort of house rules before I do, and that's just that we've muted you all upon entry, so you'll be welcome to pose questions to our speakers either in the chat bar or verbally later on. We're just going to get through a number of agenda items which will cover the topics of this evening, and then you'll be able to pose your questions. So please do feel free, and hopefully you all received the report that I circulated earlier, which will as well inform the information that you'll be hearing this evening. So without further ado, Philip, over to you.
Thank you, Lucia, and yeah, good evening again, everyone, and good to see so many, I say, friendly faces. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to our Cayman-themed event, where we'll be discussing essentially what's happened in the past few months in the Cayman Islands, and then the present, and then perhaps looking towards the next few months with regards to Cayman-UK relations. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our two key guest speakers this evening. First guest speaker is Hadley Roberts, who typically works as a freelance translator, specialising in legal affairs. So Hadley was actually in a past life candidate in the 2014 European Parliament elections and the 2015 UK general election. More recently, Hadley has observed local and regional elections in France, Spain, Croatia, as well as Bulgarian parliamentary elections and a German federal election and 2 Irish general elections. Very recently, Hadley's been observing the results in the Cayman Islands, which he will be fascinating to hear, I'm sure, how he found that experience. And it's also my pleasure to welcome to her first, I think, official football event, Dr. Tasha E. Banks, who is soon to be moving to the United Kingdom and will be leading the Cayman Islands Directorate in London. So welcome to you both. It's great to have you. Before I introduce Hadley just to talk on the election and essentially the key findings from his report, I do want to give everyone a summary of what's happened. So essentially, the elections in the Cayman Islands were held on the 14th of April this year to elect 19 members of parliament. They were originally scheduled for 26th of May, but the then Premier asked the Governor, Martin Roper, to dissolve Parliament on the 14th of February. The move was made in order to avoid a no confidence motion against Speaker McKeever Bush. So the results, and I was one of the people that did stay up in the UK to actually watch the results. I went to bed about 6 in the morning thinking the Progressives were back in. And then a few hours later, it was a completely different story. So we now have a new government for those of you based in the UK, the best example I can give is after the 2010 election, where we had those 4 or 5 days discussion where would Gordon Brown hang on? Would Nick Clegg do a deal with him or David Cameron? Well, that brought back memories for me, because that's how it felt with this Cayman result. For a few days, it just was not clear who was going to be forming the new government. But eventually, it was the independents. So the Cayman Islands has now got a new premier. His name is Wayne Panton, and the People's Progressive Movement and now have moved into opposition. Just to clarify, there is not the party structure like we have in the UK, although so there are lots of independents who hold seats. And yes, there is the People's Progressive Movement is a political party, but they're now, as I say, part of the opposition. I believe they have 7 seats of the 19 in total. So that's just a bit of a context. There is McKeever Bush has been re-elected rather as the Speaker, and Governor Martin Roper has issued obviously all the ministers. And the last point I would make is that the former UK office holder for Cayman Islands, Andre E. Banks, is a minister now himself, and we would like to publicly congratulate Andre, who's was a good friend and is a good friend to Friends of the British Overseas Territories. So that's enough from me. If I may now hand over to Hadley to talk a bit more about the election and essentially what you've observed. Hadley, over to you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you to FOTBOT for hosting me and everybody who has tuned in this afternoon for us, evening for most of you, I suppose. I didn't quite hear all of the summary there, Philip. I think it may be my internet connection's not too stable. So just let me know if I start cutting out or if you can't hear me at all.
Sure.
I think you hit quite an interesting point on the head there in your summary, which was the lack of a traditional or stable party system. I'll come on to that in a little bit. To explain what I was doing, I was head of the domestic election observation mission. And that means that typically we would invite, a nation might invite a series of international election observers, which you've all heard of. These would be international bodies, whether they be UN or EU or something like that. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association conducted a virtual mission, I understand, where they spoke to various people, much like we're doing, candidates and other relevant people. Their report was due about 2 weeks ago, but I haven't seen it published yet. So we look out for that. At the moment, I'm afraid you'll just have to wade through our comprehensive 60-page report. You see, due to various unsurprising travel restrictions and COVID protocols and so on, it wasn't terribly easy to organize international observers to be present on the ground in and around election day. So His Excellency Governor Roper appointed a team of 9 individuals, and then the team elected me as the head, as someone who has observed elections and knows elections inside out in other countries. So I suppose the headline from an observation point of view is simply that the elections were fair, legitimate, credible, free, all of those usual words that you would hope an election could achieve were achieved. It was very well organized. Staff were very professional. We had our 9 dotted around throughout the day on election day itself. And also there are a couple of days for advance voting where people who, for whatever reason, are unavailable to vote on the day, they're given an opportunity slightly in advance. For example, people who are working in polling stations on polling day would be an obvious example. That was all 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, if insofar as we're qualified to give a score. There's comparatively little room for improvement in the administration of the elections. So that alone is enough to give everybody a great deal of confidence in Cayman's electoral system and the conduct of the election. So with that said, we took the opportunity to interview as many candidates as we had time to interview, various other people who we judged had some kind of insight that they could provide us regarding the election, whether these were former election workers or the elections office themselves, including the election supervisor, so we could make sure that our recommendations and our observations were entirely unbiased and impartial and based on fact. So if I turn to the report, I think most people have received a copy of it. Likely what I suspect most people will do is probably skip towards the latter third, where we talk about some of the themes where we identified most areas for improvement. In particular, we looked at various technical aspects around polling day, such as signage and participation of women and accessibility for people with various elements of disability or impairment. That was all essentially excellent. There's very little that could be done that wasn't already done there. So it's a very positive report and series of observations there. We noted and echoed the previous international observation report regarding various elements of the secrecy of the vote. In the Cayman Islands, there's a procedure which was, to be clear, followed to the letter, and we've made recommendations to improve that procedure to provide greater secrecy of the vote. The population living on the Cayman Islands is currently estimated at about 71,000. Of that, the voting population is approximately 23 to 24,000. Divided between the 19 seats, you have a situation where even at 80% turnout, which was sort of the benchmark, Cayman Islands has a reputation for excellent participation and turnout at between 70, 75 and 80% varied across the seat. So I think the national overall turnout was something like 66 or 67 possibly. So it's very positive from a statistical point of view. And also from a pure numbers point of view, this was an election where more ballots were cast than any other previous election, even though the percentage turnout was down slightly. So that's another very positive thing. That said, it takes, let's say, about 1,000 votes per seat. And thus, if you have a 2-candidate situation, in theory, you need to get 501 votes. Now, for anybody in the UK, that's an extremely small number. And thus, to tie it back to secrecy of the vote, there needs to be extra precautions, because many people can identify anybody else on site. To cite an example, I was telling some of the FOTBOT committee earlier, a couple of weeks ago, we received the email blast for this event. It was the first time I saw Tasha's photograph in an email bulletin. I met her a couple of hours later and was able to identify her because we were in the same supermarket together. Likewise, last week, we were in the same supermarket and we ran into Franz Manson, the deputy governor. So it's that kind of environment where it's very easy to get to know everybody, probably not unique to other British overseas territories, but that just explains why people can get very concerned about the presence of certain serial numbers in certain places, or whether serial numbers are particularly short and therefore memorable. So one of the main recommendations we made, echoing the international report, was the removal of these little serial numbers that are printed on the ballot. There are other serial numbers printed on the counterfoil, which is the bit that the ballot is torn off, and that's not unusual, but we did recommend in particular removing that serial number, just because it would remove a lot of worry. Now, to be clear, we don't believe that there were any breaches of secrecy that took place. The concern is that, in theory, if various pieces were interlocked, and again, to be clear, probably a judge would have to order, in theory, be possible to trace a vote back to a voter, which is something we, as observers, would not recommend when it comes to secrecy of the vote. There are various other data protection issues we recommended improvement of as well, including when a voter attends the polling station, they hand over their ID. This is then read out quite loudly to everybody in the polling station, and we recommended that that be done in a more discreet way. Further, on the Elections Office website, the list of electors, the electoral roll, is published. So anybody on the whole internet can look up an elector's name, address, occupation, and certain other details. And we recommended a review to say, is an elector's occupation, A, necessary to the election office? And again, we received an explanation as to why this is done. It was probably valid many elections ago, and it's just a legacy issue. But we recommended that in the light of the new Data Protections Act, that is something that should be revised and reformed. Then one of the key issues that came out from our interviews with all kinds of people was that there's very little legal framework for the registration of campaign financing. And to be clear, we didn't identify any incidents of either vote buying or improper donations or improper lobbying, partly because we were just simply beyond our resources. But it was one of the concerns we heard time and time again about how candidates were financing their campaigns. We did try to put our heads together to think of some kind of framework, but it was a bit beyond our expertise. You'd need to get financial experts, of which we are not short in the Cayman Islands, to come up with a framework. But clearly there's a number of aspects that just require some rules where rules have not previously existed, rather than any suggestion of improper conduct. So there were discussions of vote buying up to the election. We did our best to collect some evidence on that. To give you an amusing example, I was shown some photographs of an individual allegedly hanging outside a polling station, distributing envelopes, presumably of cash. Now, we went to the election supervisor and said, what's this about? And he essentially said, oh yes, we'd heard about this. We mention this to the police, etc. But it transpired that both candidates had made complaints about the same individual. So we have no idea what was going on or what was happening there. But it was clearly a concern that people felt very strongly about. So that's the very on the ground stuff. More esoterically, there's simply just very little framework for registering who's donated what discussions were had vis-a-vis lobbying and that kind of thing. We also recommended greater transparency of the elected members' register of interests, because at present it's not terribly accessible for people to see. To be clear, there is one that does exist. There is a legal provision behind it. I believe it's the Standards in Public Life division that deals with that, but it's not as simple as in the UK Parliament, where you simply go on to parliament.uk and then you can see the register of interests. Further, we looked at the political system a little bit, and we didn't make strictly concrete recommendations there, but we identified areas that required further development. For example, as Philip mentioned, the party system. There is essentially only one functioning, as in operational, political party present in the Cayman Islands, which is the People's Progressive Movement. And they submitted, I believe, about 8 candidates. Then there were 4 additional candidates who were supposedly loosely aligned to the Progressive Movement. They were called the Alliance, but they were not a registered entity. They were, it seemed, a collection of candidates who were registered as independents. And when campaign spending reports were submitted and were published, then in a rather complicated way, it was an umbrella submission for all PPM and all Alliance candidates under the umbrella of the Alliance. So we were recommending greater clarity and a better framework for registering who is allied with who and that kind of structure. And that may not seem like a particularly important point, but when you consider a more political analysis and less an observational analysis of the situation, it could be a little bit confusing for an elector who is voting for what they assume is an independent candidate, but in some different documentation, they're an Alliance candidate. In other documentation, there's something else. They seem to share a logo, they seem to share a platform, but it's not always clear to what extent these different political forces are either cooperating or coherent in their views. Now, it may be that the incumbent, the new government considers that not a particularly important issue and nothing happens. But what we tried to do in our report, and I recommend you read that section in particular so that nothing is misinterpreted, is that there are various consequences that could arise from that kind of somewhat one-sided system. For example, the PPM/Alliance was the only organization that had the pool of resources to submit advertising to the main local newspaper, the main national newspaper, sorry. So there's a possible inequality of arms there compared to an independent candidate, whether a leading one or a novice one. Again, that may be judged to be not significant or not have a significant impact, but from our analysis, we set out possible issues that may arise from that. Then to conclude, I suppose, removing my observer hat and adding on my simple person in the Cayman Islands, seeing what occurred and having read the news. After our mission was over and after the election concluded, you will have seen, and I think, Philip, you noted that the Progressive Movement was not returned as the government, this was largely due to various negotiations between certain leading independent candidates. They coalesced in some form of organization after election day and produced what they're now calling the PACT government, which I believe stands for People-Led Accountability. I can't remember the C, and then the T was transparency. I'm sure Tasha can remind us later on. Led by Mr. Panton, who's former progressive, who lost his seat in 27, returned successfully this time around. What we observed, and the governor made a statement about this, was quite a vitriolic reaction to certain independent candidates who had apparently given undertakings to the progressives that they would, should they be elected, support a progressive government, and then concluded that they would prefer to support a Wayne Panton independent-led government. And it's up to everybody's individual political views whether they think that that is a reasonable course of action, as in perhaps it was just smart politics, perhaps it was people agreeing to things and then breaking their word. That's not really my role. It's not really something I'm terribly interested in getting into. It's just that it links into a very common theme about the role of social media in political life and elections that is well beyond my comprehension, and probably everybody who isn't very, very, very experienced in the field about how we move forward from that. So hopefully that is a reasonably comprehensive overview. I haven't seen Philip waving at me to move it on. Overall, excellent administration of elections, a few recommendations that may or may not be brought forward, and overall everybody should be very pleased for their participation in the electoral process.
Yeah, thank you, Hadley. Yeah, no, that was perfect. So thanks for sticking to the time. So that's you literally bang on time. So it's 8:30 now. So really helpful for those of us. There's lots of people on the call who I know watch the election results closely. So it's really interesting to hear how, we were not there. We were just watching from thousands of miles away. So thank you for that. I do want to just say at this point, we will hear very shortly from Tasha Banks, but I do want to just emphasize that Tasha is a civil servant, so she will not be able to give if you have any questions, and we do welcome, and please do start posting your questions in the chat. But Tasha won't be able to give a political opinion for obvious reasons. On that note, though, I do want to bring in Tasha, if just to introduce yourself, Tasha, but also just to talk about the logistics of the change, in the sense of, has there been, what's the change like as a civil servant, just changing from one government to another? If you maybe able to say a few words about that aspect of the election. That's over to you, Tasha. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as Hadley says, there are 0 degrees of separation from any two people in our community. And so, you work with people in a professional environment, but you're also family to them, or you're friends to them, or, your auntie's sister's cousin is friends with them. And so there's this connection between all of us. And so it makes for a very interesting place to live and work. And it makes it very interesting as a civil servant. And I stayed up and watched the election coverage, and, so you're watching as a civil servant on the one hand, but you're also watching as a member of the community and as a Caymanian. And so, I share very little about, what's in my heart about the elections as they're unfolding, and always reminding myself that at the end of the day, no matter how the cookie crumbles, if you will, no matter what the outcome is, I have to be able to serve the elected government of the day, with all the vigor and passion that I can muster. And so you try not to get emotionally connected to the outcome, because the outcome, doing that doesn't help you necessarily to be effective in your job. And so, I mean, my job as a civil servant is to deliver on the priorities of the elected government. whomever that might be, and the people choose the government, and I respect that decision. You know, the outcome of elections. I think right now where we're at, and it's quite an exciting place in the civil service, having a new government. We had a PPM coalition government for the past 2 terms, and I've been here. I started in 2013, in September 2013. So I started when the PPM government first joined in its first coalition form back in 2013. And so this is actually, for me, my first change of government, my experience going through a change of government. So it's quite an exciting and invigorating time as a civil servant, as we're kind of waiting with bated breath to see the outcome of the budget process that we're in right now, and the government kind of forming itself and determining and articulating its broad outcomes and giving us the policy steer that we need as a civil service to be able to deliver on their priorities. By July 14th, they need to table the strategic policy statement in the House of Parliament. So by July 14th, we will have, as a civil service, if not before then, but certainly by then, the government's broad outcomes and, you know, our budget for the next 2 years, starting in January 2022. So really kind of coming in line with a new government is the opportunity through their experience and through their political agendas, you know, looking at maybe some shifting of focus and agendas within government. And one of the things our civil service, under the leadership of our Deputy Governor and head of the civil service, Mr. Frans Manderson, we have become a very flexible and agile civil service. So what we have right now is a situation where we have new ministries that have been set up under this government. We have a Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. So while the environment has always been a key focus and agenda area, it is now a ministry all onto itself, which really kind of sets the tone and makes a very strong statement and sends a strong message from this government that the environment is a key focus area for them and a really critical policy area. So they've created that new ministry. We've seen the restructuring of some of the ministries and the different policy areas kind of moving across government. And with that, then as a civil service, we then have to be agile and move with it. So we've got civil servants and departments that are moving under new chief officers, permanent secretaries, under, you know, many of them. We've got a few, we've got some, you know, Ms. Juliana O'Connor Connolly has returned and she's back in education. So some people have a minister they're familiar with, but by and large, across the board, all chief officers are getting used to and accustomed to their new minister, learning their new minister, and the civil service is moving and adjusting. And even for the London office, so under the PPM government, the London office sat under the ministry of Mitiama. And that ministry has changed, but the London office has also been moved. So we now sit under the Cabinet Office, where the London office previously was at one point in our history. And so, you know, we're looking at the changes and working with a new chief officer and, you know, preparing for a great couple of years ahead in this new budget that we're coming upon. But lots of change. But I think the change is exciting, and the change brings an opportunity. And so, yeah, so I'm really happy to be a part of that. And certainly the sentiment in the government building here is, you know, is that of opportunity and looking forward to kind of getting the broad outcomes of the government so that we can start delivering on the political priorities of our new government.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful again to use. And this is why it's really, you know, we try and get speakers that, you know, are based where things are happening, and you know, there's only so much the newsreels can give us. So I think we will just perhaps move a bit more to questions at this point, unless, Lucia, am I missing anything before we do that? Yeah, because I do want to ask Tasha a bit more about the future, but as we'll wrap up on the election with some questions, and then we'll just move to the next topic, which is the next few months. So we have had a question from Gus Eldridge. Gus has written, which results of the recent election were expected, and were there any unexpected from their point of view? I suppose you ask Hadley to answer that one. Is if that's obviously Hadley, if you want.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Again, just to be clear, completely separate from the observation, which is not involved in picking candidates or anything like that, but just from a general public reaction, I think, generally speaking, it was not a terribly surprising election. I wonder if that is perhaps because I'm just a cynical ex-party hack in that respect, in that I was inclined to think that the ones who'd been there for a long time were going to stay. Insofar as I can go a little bit beyond our role, I think there were possibly there's a bit of looking around when Northside came through. Ezard Miller, he was quite a well-established member of parliament beforehand, and he was quite a leading voice in the opposition, I understand. He incidentally had founded the Cayman People's Party shortly before the election, which he was the only candidate. Not unusual in a party's first election, but he was not returned. Some people who were in the know seem to suggest that based on the ground reaction, it was not so much of a surprise, but for everybody who is a little bit further away, they would perhaps looked at that and thought, oh, that's a bit interesting. Other runners and riders, I suppose, I suppose the big one was Mr. McKeever Bush in where's his seat? West Bay West, I believe. In the end, given all the publicity and such surrounding his background and various recent events, and simply the campaign as well was quite newsworthy. He, I believe, won by about 27 votes, which is very few, as I'm sure you can imagine. But he was retained. I don't know what the feeling was there. I simply don't know. In terms of the more noisy campaigns, particularly on election day, I understand that Georgetown North was quite a heated contest between an incumbent progressive candidate and a fairly strong independent challenger, who I think had stood the previous time as well. So it was a bit of a rematch. The progressive incumbent retained his seat. But on election day, this links back to our report a little bit. On election day, electors did seem to find the presence of candidates somewhat off-putting. To be clear, it was all within the legislation and within the rules as far as we could see, but clearly electors did not like having the candidate there, for want of a better phrase, hanging out around a polling station. For the sake of context, there's only one polling station per seat, there's only one polling location that has a couple of rooms with polling stations in. But what that means is that there's only one location that a candidate or a campaign needs to be present at, compared to in the UK, where you've got, even in a local city council election, a dozen of different places to be. So it's just not possible.
Yeah, you can avoid the candidate in the UK, that's for sure. if you don't want to. Yes. But what you say is that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I'm sure many people weren't either.
Just particularly on mobile polling, where the box travels to the home of elderly, infirm people who can't move about. Having a candidate go to a house, it's not against the rules, but it's something that electors don't typically like. So.
Yeah, no, understood. And we've just had a comment just to say, Gus says that you have a fantastic backdrop, Hadley, to
thank you,
because it is making many people here feel quite envious. So we've had a question from Neil.
Purely for the natural light, you know.
Yes, well, clearly. Hadley's report mentioned mild concerns about police presence. Were these due to lack of thought or more sinister, or more generally, how were the police received?
Yeah, our report did note a few concerns about that. To use a phrase I've used many times so far, to be clear, we did not suspect nor perceive any kind of pressure from any officer, or nor did we hear of any complaints or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just simply not terribly accepted practice to have, in isolated examples, a police officer sitting next to a ballot box. Particularly when everybody's very easy to identify. It's not something that did cause a problem, but it's something that could potentially cause a problem, which is what our report was all about. It's avoiding issues for the future. So we don't want to, we weren't calling anybody out or pointing any fingers, not at all. It was just that the police were doing things that could better be dealt with by, let's say, civilian staff. So for one example, I mentioned the candidates hanging around earlier. In our view, it would be more appropriate for the returning officer or local elections supervisor or presiding officer or somebody to say, come on now, time to move on, rather than to have a police officer do that. Now, there's various different roles the police have here, such as they're often very present for crowd control purposes, and that's all fine. It's just that when they're inside what is essentially a little tent, not a whole great deal bigger than this little patio here, it's something that we just didn't really seem to think that was appropriate. And again, I was only European, and in all the elections I've seen, I've never really seen police be quite so visible. And I think they'd probably just be better off from their own point of view, being slightly less thick on the ground, if you like.
Okay,
I've answered the question, Neil.
Yeah, no, it has. So no, thank you for that. On that point, because we've only got 15 minutes, and I do want to just open up the subject a bit more to the future. And on that note, I do want to ask, and we've already got two questions for Tasha on this. But Tasha, if you can, I suppose, just maybe mention a bit about what you're moving into, and any, if you're able to say, any particular objectives or aspirations, or what the Cayman London office will be looking to do as you take the reins.
Sure. So the London office really is an extension of the Cayman Islands government, but in the UK. And so one of the things that I've been doing while I'm on the ground here is taking the opportunity, the time to meet with our chief officers, our most senior persons in our ministries, to invite the opportunity for the London office to be an extension of their ministry or their portfolio, and then to explore with them how we might do that. What might that opportunity look like? What are some key deliverables that the London office can support or deliver on behalf of the ministry in the UK? Are there particular relationships that ministries would like built overseas, and can we help in that regard? Are there particular unique opportunities or policy areas that they're looking to advance work in, but they need resources or support in some way, technical assistance from persons or organizations, entities that might be in the UK. So looking at how we can support, and at the same time, looking at how we might continue our engagement once I'm in the UK. So it's very easy being stationed in the Cayman Islands to know what's happening within the government in the Cayman Islands when you're on the ground. And the what I don't want to happen is to get to the UK and I lose touch with what's happening here, that I'm then not able to accurately and intelligently speak about the programs and projects that are being advanced here across policy areas, that I'm then not able to look for unique opportunities for the government, the community, the private sector, the country as a whole. And so looking at how we might maintain that engagement while I'm in the UK, so that the London office is aware of what's happening here. What are the priority areas? What are the agendas? What are the programs and projects being advanced, so that we can look for those opportunities, but also speak and share in the UK about the work that's being advanced here. So I think that's really kind of a big area of work that we're doing. The other thing, and I think across kind of all ministries, or kind of a theme across the government, is looking at opportunities to change the narrative. So I think sometimes we speak about, or the global community speaks about, the Cayman Islands through a very narrow lens. And it's either one of two things: to talk about the fact that we are an absolutely amazing tourist destination and have much to offer the world by way of our beaches and our attractions here. The other lens, very narrow lens, is that of financial services. And so one of the things that I'm looking to do is to expand the narrative of the Cayman Islands, to be able to share with the global community other areas and aspects of our country outside of tourism, outside of financial services. And to that end, one of the projects that I've started while I'm here is producing and filming a series of short videos on, the working title is My Cayman Islands. And so last week, the national flower of the Cayman Islands is the wild banana orchid. And last week was the last week that was in bloom. It only blooms once a year, late May, early June. And so went out to the Botanic Park with a film crew last week and filmed the footage to do a piece on the wild banana orchid. Earlier today, I was at the National Gallery and we filmed a piece there. We're filming a piece on our traditional music, on our traditional foods, working with the National Trust. We've got a couple of pieces that we're going to film there. So really helping to share the story and the narrative of the Cayman Islands and the people of the Cayman Islands to the global audience, but a much broader kind of story and narrative than you might have been exposed to in the past. We have such a rich culture here. The arts here is well loved, and we have some amazing, artists in the country. We have a love for our heritage. That you see that in our foods, in our connection to our traditional arts and crafts that's respected here. You see that in our music. And so really showcasing that. So one of the things that I'd like to have the opportunity to do as an ambassador for the Cayman Islands on the global stage is to really share the full and complete story of My Cayman Islands.
Wonderful. That's really excited to hear about that. So thank you. Hadley, you've got your hand up. Are you wanting to come in?
Yes, I don't want to jump the queue or anything because everyone else's question is more important than mine. But if Tasha wouldn't mind, I'd really like to ask her if there are any plans to open some kind of Brussels office.
Yeah, so you may have, the government has been looking at opening offices in other jurisdictions. So they've been exploring North America, they've been exploring Asia, and they've been exploring Brussels. And so hopefully we'll hear in the next few weeks what decisions have been made around those offices, but a lot of exploratory work has been done around that. And I think right now with the government looking at, their priorities for the next 4 years, doing the budget for the next 2 years, I'm expecting that we're going to get some announcements about possible new offices over the next few weeks.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Gus, another question from Gus. Gus, do you want to just come in on audio to ask it?
Oh, yes, it's for you, Tasha. It's what are you looking forward to in terms of UK-Cayman relations in the coming years?
I think I'm looking for the opportunity to work together, not just, I think for me, one of the things that's important, not just for the Cayman Islands, but for the overseas territories, is to look for opportunities for greater partnership in particularly in policy areas that impact across the British overseas territories. Over the past 6 years or so, for most of my civil service career, I've been here since, as I said, since 2013. So almost 7 years. September will be 8 years. A lot of the work that I've done has been with the view to look at how can we extend the work that we're doing in the Cayman Islands across the OTs? How can we across the OTs leverage the opportunity to work collaboratively, sharing resources, sharing expertise, intellectual, and financial resources. We, across the British Overseas Territories, there are a lot of similar issues that we have. Some of them aren't all the OTs, some of it's clusters, but certainly, there are groupings of issues, or there are themes that impact the OTs. And so looking at how we might be more strategic around the support that the UK and the FCDO gives to the OTs by greater collaboration across the OTs. And that's one thing I think that's really important to me. So it's not specific to Cayman, but again, Cayman then has the opportunity to leverage and benefit from, the resources, the expertise that are sitting in other OTs. So one example of that is in the way of prisons inspections, prisons monitoring, as well as child safeguarding review. So those are two areas, policy areas that I've been working in for the past few years. Mm-hmm. And, looking at, we had a child safeguarding case review that we conducted in 2019. We put together a panel here. We had expertise from the UK come to help us to develop the members of that panel. But if we're going to look to have future child safeguarding reviews, if we're going to look to have them, 3 or 4 reviews a year, we can't just do it with resources that we have here. And, it takes easily a week and a half to 2 weeks to conduct a proper review. And so by leveraging the resources across the OTs and bringing panel members from different OTs into the Cayman Islands, and our experts go over to other OTs, you reduce also, back to what Hadley started out saying in the beginning, you reduce kind of the bias that we have, or any, challenges we have in conflict of interest, because you've got, a mixed panel. So the outcome, I think, will be much better when you've got that mixed. But also we're developing resources across the OTs and collaborating in a space and building, our capabilities in a space that impacts, all of the OTs.
Right, and another question we've had from Robert Midgley, and it's a question that I think's on a lot of people's minds. When can UK citizens go on holiday again to the Cayman Islands?
So my question is, when can I come to the UK and not have to quarantine? When are we going to be on the green?
That's maybe next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we are having, there's new regulations as announced by the Premier at the last press conference. We do have new regulations that are coming out this week, and so looking at reducing the period of quarantine to 5 days for persons who can. We can verify through secure means that they have been vaccinated. Now, the challenge with that right now is to ensure that we have secure means of verification, and we don't. So while the UK, you have an app through the NHS, what we need to be able to do on this side is actually read that and be able to verify it. So you can show us on your phone, but we need on our side then to be able to verify that that's authentic. And so that piece is being worked on right now. So once there is secure verification, then persons can quarantine for 5 days, which still isn't no quarantine, but it's a vast reduction from 14 days. So we will have reduced quarantine where we can securely verify vaccines, and more information is going to come out on that over the next few days as we release the communications on that. But in terms of opening, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I don't envy the members of cabinet, at all, in having to make that decision, because the chances are, opening, there's a good likely chance that we will have some level of community transmission. And so, then the question is, well, what level of community transmission will result in us going back in lockdown? And can we afford to go back into lockdown? And will going back into lockdown be worse than the current state that we have now? We are totally open inside of our borders. We have some restrictions around public gathering, but we have a carnival coming up. So we don't have restrictions that, prevent us from having a carnival as long as everybody in the carnival is vaccinated. So, it's really, there's a lot at stake. And certainly I can say that caucus and cabinet have been, looking at this. The technical experts have been providing policy advice. And I think over the next few weeks, we'll see some decisions coming out from cabinet.
Thank you. And we've had I think a really interesting comment from a good friend and colleague, Dr. Mike, who runs the United Kingdom Conservation Forum, And he just, Dr. Mike says the cross territories idea, Tasha, is great. He looks forward to Cayman's strong involvement in the territory's Environment Ministers Council, and also building on the existing strong involvement of government and NGOs in the UK and its wider Caribbean working group. I would just want to, suppose, pick your brains just on, are there any plans for Cayman to take a different role or a more leading role, perhaps in the Joint Ministerial Council? Is that something you see as important or not?
I mean, a lot of that depends on kind of our role in UCATA. You know, certainly I plan to be a very active member of UCATA, and, you know, certainly use that as an opportunity to ensure that, you know, not just, you know, the agenda of the Cayman Islands informs the direction of travel, you know, as I would expect every, you know, all my colleagues, all the other representatives to do for their territory. But, you know, I think, you know, identifying those kind of key policy areas that are priority to the government here, to the Cayman Islands government, and looking at how I might leverage opportunities in the UK to advance, you know, to advance that agenda is certainly something I'll be looking forward to.
Lovely. And also, I'll probably ask Hadley, a question from Neil. Is there a danger that with so many independents, the situation could be so fluid that the current Premier could be easily unseated?
Well, let me just come up with a couple of points first. One, it is also worth underlining Tasha's point that the vaccination campaign has gone really well in Cayman. The outgoing government, the incoming government have done an excellent job about promoting it, and all the ministers have been on board, the governor's been on board, everybody's doing everything they can. I last came over in January bringing one of the first consignments of the vaccine, and everybody was applauding and things. Another thing, can I just say it's really helpful, and thank you to everybody who has their camera on, because it's so much easier to talk to a wall of people than a wall of darkness. So thank you very much, Augustus and Nicola and Antti and everybody. To get to Neil's question, right, looking forward, is there a danger that with so many independents, the situation could be so fluid that the Chief Minister could be unseated? The short answer to that is there's not a danger, because you can have as many independent candidates as you like. You can have as many party candidates as you like. It's not the candidates so much that run the show. It's those who are elected. And I think the message from the report is clear that there could be steps taken to produce greater political stability, because what we saw in the days after the election,
15 hours.
What we saw in the days after the election was a little bit of a switchover, where some independent candidates moved over to shift their support to the Progressives, and then they shifted back, or the other way around, we don't really know. And likewise, certain party candidates and even former ministers left the Progressive movement to go over to the independents. So I suppose the thrust of your question is, will there be another election in a year? And from someone who loves elections, I say, yes, I hope so. But from a realistic point of view, I suppose we just have to say, well, look at 2020, anything can happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. So I've just okay. I'll take this as a last question from Charlie. Is there potential for Cayman's incredible natural heritage to feature in the video series? I don't know if you want to come on unmute yourself, Charlie, and maybe expand on that question, or.
Yeah, so it was just following on really from the idea about expanding the narrative about the Cayman Islands, and given that there are such amazing, incredible natural habitats and wild places, I wondered if you'd already given consideration to that in the series, and whether there's potential to include a kind of spotlight on Cayman's wild places in the series.
It's an interesting idea. I don't think we'll get around to it for this first set. So I leave on July 8th. So I've got to get whatever filming for the first set of pieces in the series done now, but I'll be back annually. And so I'll be looking over the next, until I get back sometime early next year at what the next pieces are going to be. So yeah. Yeah. Did you have, in particular, was there any place that you had in mind, or what were you thinking in particular?
Not as such. I mean, I'm with the RSPB. I manage our Caribbean program, and we recently we purchased a small patch of land out in the Salina Reserve, and I think it just, typically people, they have an association with Caribbean islands in particular. You might have a sort of set an image, and I think you wouldn't necessarily associate incredible wetlands and forests and so on. I think having really good quality drone footage and maybe some interviews, I think the National Trust are pretty well placed as well to talk to that. And maybe worth considering perhaps if there's scope to do another round of videos next year, and that's something we'd be happy to assist with. But obviously they're the local experts.
Yeah, we are looking in this series possibly to feature the mangroves, because we do have a lot of really great footage of the mangroves from both beneath the water line as well as drone coverage of it. So that may actually be in this one. We're finalizing the last couple of them now.
Excellent. All right, thank you.
So I think apologies, I know there's one or two questions we've not gotten to, but our time is up. But do drop an email to FOTBOT, inquiries@fotbot.org, and we will pass, if it's okay with Tasha and Hadley, if there's any written questions, I will pass them on to you, because but otherwise that was really so you might say I say this at every event, but it was a really interesting event to hear really what's been happening. Hadley, you've got your hand up again, so I'll let you just before we
so just for the benefit of the audience, I'm going to drop a link in the chat, which is to the press conference the Observers put on when we published our report. It's about half an hour. It just explains our report in a more audiophile way, if anyone's interested. And I'm gonna just drop my email in the chat as well, in case anybody wants to, pursue any lines of inquiry.
No, thank you, Hadley.
That's all from me there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And on that note, I just wanted to just say a huge thank you to you both. And especially Tasha, I know you must have a million things going on at the moment as you prepare for this big move. But we look forward to perhaps seeing you in a 3D sense when we next speak. Who knows? We look forward to that. Gus, would you mind just posting a link to the FOTBOT shop, as you always do?
Yeah, will do.
So as ever, we're still selling books from Stuart and BBC Three's excellent series on the British Overseas Territories by the environmentalist Stuart McPherson, and various other items. Just check out our shop. Apologies if you were expecting our next event to be a barbecue on the 13th of July. Feel free to have a word with Boris, but we've had to delay that. We never cancel events in FOTBOT, we only delay them. So that event is now taking place on August the 10th. But again, who knows, that might be a benefit. Tasha, if you're around, we'll be able to host you at our barbecue in central London overlooking the Thames. So we just pray we have some good Cayman weather, which we have actually had until very recently. We've had some very, very hot days in London. It's been tropical rain as well. So yeah, it's it's been quite unique. What else is happening? Just to say to all our members and supporters, obviously, thank you for joining tonight. So yes, our next event is the barbecue in August the 10th. We're delighted to announce that our keynote guest speaker for our main fundraising event on December the 2nd, which is the Black Tie Dinner, is the Honourable George Ferguson, who was Governor of Bermuda from 2012 to 2016. So he'll have a lot to say. He was also Governor of the Pitcairn Islands. So there you go. We'll get a governor 2 for 1 on our black tie dinner. So tickets are now available. Please do book on our website. We're also doing our sponsored walk. We've raised over £8,000 now for the Falkland Islands Museum. And myself, Gus and Stephen looking to do a half marathon walk on September the 4th, which is a Saturday. If anyone is interested in taking part, we very much welcome that. The minimum target is £60. So we do ask you to contribute £60 towards the Falkland Islands Museum appeal. And then, of course, we're into party season, so we attend Labour, Conservative, and maybe one or two other parties. We're quite keen to go to the Green Party conference, but COVID scuppered that last year. Yeah, lots going on is really what I'm getting at, despite COVID. And in fact, this is quite a milestone because this officially, unless Boris really messes things up, dare I say, this is just over a year ago, we started the first ever football webinar in May, and this is officially our last webinar coming out of COVID. So just a huge thanks to everyone that's made these events possible. We were, as a small charity, we didn't know if we'd survive, quite frankly, at the beginning. How would we offer? We've always been known for our face-to-face events, but it turns out webinar Zoom saved us and allowed us to continue offering the unique events that we do. So that's it, really. Thank you, Lucia, and to the Gus, to Robert, and to all your questions. And safe journey over to London next month, Tasha. Hadley, continue enjoying the background there, and we hope to perhaps see you in London as well in the near future. So that's it, everyone, and you can go and enjoy the football now. I hear it's currently 1-1. Is it, Gus?
It's 1-0 to England. It's
1-0. So I was thinking of the Scotland game, Scotland-Croatia, 1-1. So yes, thank you all for obviously prioritising this event over the football. So, and yeah, on that note, have a good evening and keep safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.